Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very honored to be invited to discuss with you the subject energy poverty in relation to human rights. Even in Europe, many people are suffering from energy poverty. This could come as a surprise to you, probably, since Europe is generally considered to be a developed and prosperous part of the world. But to mention some numbers, in Europe in 2009, more than 15 million people were suffering by energy poverty. And almost 11% of the population were unable to keep their home adequately warm in 2012. So the scale of energy poverty in Europe is huge. And also, worldwide, this problem is huge. This raises the question, what constitutes energy poverty? A definition, therefore, might be that energy poverty is the inability to keep the home adequately warm at an affordable cost, and that fuel poverty derives from a combination of low household income, poor heating, poor insulation standards, and high energy prices. Because of the scale, the issue of energy poverty needs to be addressed urgently. It also needs to be a part of the European political agenda, and it is. My introduction discusses the issue of energy poverty. Doing so, I will be focusing on Europe, but what I will bring up will be also relevant in the context of the United Nations. Regarding this issue, I would like to ask you this. Do citizens have a right to access to energy supply? And if so, is this a fundamental right? And what do this right include? That's all not so clear. I assume that access to energy should be recognized as a human right. The most important consideration for this is that energy is a basic need. After all, without access to energy, we cannot meet our basic needs such as family life, food, comfort, education, healthcare, and a professional life. A second relevant consideration is that a lack of energy cannot be compensated by any substitute, for there is no substitute. So in my opinion, it's very important to recognize a human right of citizens to accessible energy supply, to fight energy poverty, and to guarantee a dignified existence. However, European and international human rights agreements have failed to explicitly address this right. I think that in spite of this, we can acknowledge a fundamental right to energy. My argument for this is simple. It's based on the fact that energy is a basic necessity of life, and without access to energy, other explicitly formulated human rights remain out of reach. Therefore, in the context of human rights, we should rate the importance of access to an adequate supply of energy equal to that of access to, for example, healthcare, family life, education, and professional life. Arguments for this view can be derived from the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union and additionally from other European legislation. The Charter of Fundamental Rights lays down a fundamental right of citizens on human dignity. According to Article 1 of the Charter, European citizens are in any case entitled to human dignity. This clause forms the core of the Charter, and as such includes every other human right that the Charter stipulates. But the list of following human rights laid down in the Charter is not limited. The right of a dignified existence implies that citizens also have a right to the minimum required to fulfill this, which refers not only to the explicitly formulated subjects of other human rights, but to everything that is necessary for that purpose. Therefore, we can, on the basis of the European Charter, establish that a citizen's right to accessible energy is at least a major ingredient of what makes up the whole body of human rights. And this brings us to the next question. What does such a right include? A fundamental right on access to energy not only presumes the availability of sufficient sources of energy and means of energy transport. For access to be practical, energy must also be affordable to households. This view can be based on other European legislation, more specifically on the European directives for the energy sector, since these directives oblige national governments to provide a universal energy service. And this obligation includes the right of households to receive energy of a certain quality at reasonable, straightforward and transparent prices that are easy to compare. This is explicitly laid down in these directives. The right to receive energy at reasonable prices therefore forms a part of the universal service which EU member states are bound to safeguard. But then, what's a reasonable energy price? Is this the same as affordable? It's not so easy to pin down the meaning of the term reasonable. Opinions on this subject vary. One very popular opinion is that the market should be left to its own devices to come up with a reasonable price. In my opinion, is this interpretation too limited? What is reasonable needs to be explained in terms of justness and fairness rather than in economical efficiency terms, since energy is a basic need of citizens. What is reasonable should therefore be determined from the perspective of income. So a reasonable price should be read as an affordable price. And furthermore, and it is a relatively recent development, the European energy directives oblige EU member states to take measures for protection of vulnerable energy consumers. The energy directives also stipulate that the term vulnerable can refer to energy poverty. And that's why I drawn the conclusion that citizens within the EU have a fundamental right to an access to affordable supply of energy. Firstly, this is because of the citizens' right to human dignity. Secondly, because of the legal obligation of member states to provide universal service for energy. And finally, because of the legal obligation of EU member states to protect citizens against energy poverty. Next, I want to argue that an affordable energy supply relates to the total cost of energy for households. After all, the energy bill of EU households is made up of a number of different components. In the first place, the energy bill covers the cost of supplying the energy. Then comes the cost of being connected to the energy network, followed by the cost of transporting the energy. Finally, there's a whole range of different taxes to be paid. All these costs together must be affordable. In other words, energy poverty can only be prevented if we look at every one of the items that make up the energy bills presented to households. I mentioned at the beginning of my lecture the scale of energy poverty in Europe is alarming. What even more alarming is the fact that the energy costs of citizens in the EU have seen a sharp increase in recent years. In relative terms, household energy costs have increased much more than the average inflation rate. This only enlarges the energy poverty problem, the most so because of the current financial and economic crisis in Europe. And we can find a number of reasons for this. But the rising taxes and the network tariffs turns out to be the main cause of the mounting energy bills in the EU. So measures are needed that regard all these components of the energy bill. And EU member states could do a lot trying to reduce the energy costs by allowing network tariffs, for instance, cutting back on production of investments, or by lowering taxes. This might offer a solution in the short term, but to be honest, the resultant savings could cause other problems that will adversely affect our environment and climate and security of supply in the long term. Considering adequate measures, we have to take into account that other key objectives of European energy policy and energy legislation are improving energy efficiency and promoting sustainable energy. However, truly implementing sustainable energy in our energy systems at the present demands large additional investments. Budgeting for the EU, the member states will probably need to invest around 1,000 billion euros from 2010 in the energy infrastructure before the year 2020, if only to achieve the percentage of sustainable energy use and energy efficiency prescribed by the European law. So, the objective of protecting citizens against excessively high energy costs may therefore conflict with the EU objective of protecting the environment and the climate. Both objectives are essential if the well-being of the population is to be safeguarded. The main challenge facing member states within Europe as well as governments elsewhere in the world will increasingly be to provide more people with access to an affordable supply of energy, while at the same time protecting the environment. For this reason, the universal right to an accessible energy is not only about availability of affordable energy, it is also about generating energy as efficiently and sustainable as possible. It's therefore important for EU member states to implement measures that will satisfy both objectives, and this can be done. An important government measure is to improve domestic thermal insulation, in particular in disadvantaged areas. It's equally important to generate domestic energy on or near the premises to eliminate the need for long-distance transport. And in the interest of self-sufficiency, it would be even better for households to produce as much of their own energy as possible. For example, by means of solar cells. This could also take the form of a collaborative effort in combination with other households in the same area, operating as energy collectives. So, in this respect too, we can find that the European Union imposes a number of obligations on its member states regarding the various types of measures aimed at stimulating energy efficiency. These measures include the implementation of smart metering. Another important factor will be the energy efficiency standard that new and upgraded houses must comply with. These standards are defined in the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, and the measures to be taken by member states regarding their housing stock will help citizens to become less dependent on energy supplied by third parties. And in addition, there are various European regulations to stimulate the construction of heat distribution networks, another measure to realize energy efficiency. So, if Europe is to fight energy poverty effectively, the measures I have outlined will be badly needed, for much remains to be done, even in Europe. It's essential that such measures also contribute to the improvement of energy sustainability and energy efficiency. What we really need is a set of government-imposed measures covering public planning, housing management, and energy control. These measures can be taken in addition to general income policies to reduce poverty as a whole. Measures could also aim to stimulate a degree of self-sufficiency in the population. Thanks to the technical advances in such fields as solar and wind-generated energy, energy storage and ICT, self-sufficiency to some extent has become a realistic option, although the cost of investment will firstly have to drop further. Until then, it will be essential for member states to subsidize innovative research. So, maybe it's time, and in my opinion, it is time to acknowledge a new human right, on the access to affordable energy. Probably not in the meaning of a fundamental right, in the sense that citizens can directly apply on it, but in the sense in the sense that governments has to take proper measures to fight energy poverty. Thank you so much for listening to me, and feel free to discuss this right.